Melody, it's so great to connect today. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You've been coaching C-level execs for quite a while at some of the top firms in the country, in the world. You teach human behavior as a professor in New York City. What lessons have you learned that you would most like to pass on to others?
The number one lesson I have had to learn time and time again for myself, and I think one of the most profound ones for my clients as well, has been that you teach people how to treat you. This is true at work. It's true in all aspects of life, but particularly when we're talking about your career and work, it's relevant to the topic of my new book, Managing Up, because every interaction with your superiors, with your boss, anyone who has more positional power than you, it sets a precedent. And so if you are consistently delivering high quality work, if you are communicating clearly about your preferences, if you have a boundary and you actually uphold it, then you are demonstrating to others that you are someone that your work should be valued, you should be respected. And on the flip side of that, if you just allow micromanagement without ever giving feedback, if you fail to speak up in a meeting or about what you want, you end up inadvertently teaching people that that behavior is acceptable. And so that's what I would say is that all of us have much more power and influence than we think to shape how people respond to us at work.
Fascinating. I've never actually quite heard that phrase. And it's quite empowering because it gives us like we are the agents. And it's easy to think, like people are just going to treat me how they want to treat me, but actually we have a ton of power over how people treat us. It just makes me think of an experience I had. One of my best friends, he was getting kind of teased by people, and um, the way he reacted in a way that shocked me and surprised me, but it kind of like it, and he was a big guy and he was a strong guy, and it told everybody else like, don't treat me like that. And at the time, it was kind of jarring how he reacted, and I thought like I would have never done it quite like that. But what happened is like he was teaching people you don't treat me like that, and they didn't. And so I love this idea of we're constantly teaching people how to treat us. So okay, you gave some examples. Maybe what are some specific ways that we can really teach people to treat us the way that we want to, have the influence and status that we'd like?
Yeah. I'll give you a very common example I see all the time, which is over apologizing. A lot of us, we're raised to be very polite. And sometimes this over apologizing comes from maybe having lower self-confidence. So we may say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that this is late," or "I apologize for XYZ." And by doing that, you're almost putting yourself in a one down position from someone. A really simple swap or switch is to just say thank you. So instead of uh, I'm so sorry for getting back to you late, you can say thank you for your patience here. And that just has such a different tone of just steadiness and self-respect to it that doesn't take any extra time, and it doesn't involve you being aggressive or you saying, well, you can't treat me like that. um, it it is a soft, gentle way to just change how people perceive you.
Really interesting, though. Over apologizing. I was playing a game over the Christmas break with somebody, with my family, and they would do something that would like, hurt my position in the game, and they would apologize. And I would always say, like, why are you apologizing? The point of the game is to win. Like, don't apologize to me for doing what you're supposed to do. And uh, it's a simple example, but I love it in the workplace. It's just a really good example of empowering yourself. Like, no reason to put ourselves down
Yeah.
if we're just doing a good job, and a simple thank you works instead.
Yeah. And another, along the same lines is if you have an idea to share, instead of prefacing it with, I don't know if this is a good idea, maybe we've tried this before, I don't know, just say, my recommendation is, or I believe we should try X because, again, why throw yourself under the bus
Yeah.
and before anybody else does? Just come out with just objective groundedness about it.
Yeah, okay. So another great technique. Okay, so how about like If you want to push back against somebody, how do
Mhm.
we tactfully say no or stick to our boundaries?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite chapters in the book. There's a whole chapter on what's called the boundaries conversation, and it's all about maybe what's a little controversial view that I have that in the workplace, no is not a complete sentence, and that's because if a colleague were to come to you, or you just said to your boss said, "Hey, can you sit in on this meeting?" and you just said no. Just imagine if you were on the receiving end of that, you wouldn't like it. So we
Yeah.
need to be a bit more tactful. And so when you're saying no, especially to your manager, there's a couple of things you can do. You can use something called the conditional yes. And let's say your boss has asked you to work 2 weekends over the next month. You might be able to say, this, this is not something I can normally accommodate. I'm happy to do it this time because I know we're under a deadline for this client. But going forward, I hope we acknowledge that this is an exception and not something I can always do. And so you're saying yes, but you're setting a boundary for the future. So you're straddling that line of I can be a team player, but going forward, this is not acceptable in the future. So that's one thing you can do. I'll pause there. Yeah,
No, these are just like such great phrases that it's like a toolkit that just makes life easier and helps us be more effective. Do you have other ways to tactfully say no?
that's right. Yeah. And so another thing you can do, and this is um, so it's sort of saying no up front, but you can also present trade-offs. So you can say, okay, I'm focused on getting this project done by the deadline we agreed on. Adding this other project would affect that timeline. We wouldn't be able to deliver on the original thing. So how would you like to reprioritize? Or what would you like me to slow down on? So you're basically saying, I can't do both of these things, pick one. You're
Yeah.
doing it in a more diplomatic way, and you're putting the authority to make that decision back in your boss's hand. You're turning it more from just a flat resistance to more of a priority setting exercise and, frankly, discussion rather than just kind of a brick wall.
Yeah, if you're a manager and somebody says that to you and it's like they're empowering me as the manager now to make the decision of how I want to best help you use your time, of course I'm going to feel fine about how you present that. I love this phrase I heard years ago. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. And so that this response gets at that idea like, yeah, I can do X, but it's going to come at the expense of Y.
Yes, exactly. And that helps position you as more of a strategic partner to your boss rather than just a subordinate who's taking orders.
Yeah, it's just, I just love these phrases, this toolkit, because as a child, when we're younger, it can just be easy to think like, say what you mean and mean what you say, and just, be blunt, say no, say yes. But there's so much to be gained by just being a little more thoughtful, a little more tactful. Okay, well, how about if you really want to gain influence and status, is it do you recommend being more blunt to the point or trying to, tell a story?
Mm. Yeah. And, I think what ties into this is a very important point that number one, you can't rely on your boss to be your only advocate. If you do that, you're in a risky position because your boss may leave. You may not always have a great relationship with them. So you have to be your own best advocate. That's just the truth of how the workplace works. Everyone is busy, they have their own pressures and demands. And so you can't expect people to just recognize your hard work. I wish that were true, but you have to be the one to put it out there. And more importantly, to not just say what you did, but also connect it to what's the real business impact. And so, yes, in the book, I do recommend learning this skill of storytelling. And I'm not talking about some, big, elaborate, 5-page essay that you're writing. This is simple anecdotes that you tell. Like when you are on a Zoom call 5 minutes ahead of time and you're there with an executive and they ask, "Oh, how's it going?" Instead of just rambling and saying, "Well, it's fine, busy, yeah, same old." Optimize that time, take advantage of it to say, "Oh, we've been working on this new thing with AI. It's going well so far. Here's what I've been learning. Here's how we're applying it to this project." It can take 2 minutes, but it does so much more to convey your impact, to pique curiosity, to convey the value that you're having than just squandering that moment.
So I consulted with an executive for a couple of years, CEO of a company that had about 20,000 employees. And every single call we got on, I'm telling you, every single time, the call would start with him telling a story about work, about something we were implementing, something he was working on. And the call would continue with him just telling story after story after story. And he was one of the most effective, loved people and executives I've ever seen. And I think so much of it is because he's just constantly telling stories that not only give you kind of insight into his life and help you get to know him, but actually make interesting points. And
Yeah.
so I just couldn't agree more with the importance and the value of just telling good stories. And maybe one other thing I would say too is I was along this idea of the importance of advocating for yourself. So I was consulting with another company and um, it was a little bit tricky each week to see what had been accomplished throughout the organization. And the work I was doing was kind of siloed. And so it was easy for people to not see what I was doing. And part of me was like, I don't want them to think I'm just like sitting around doing nothing. And so I approached them. I said, hey, how about each week I write a summary of what has happened in the company and what I've done throughout the week. And so, and it was just amazing. I mean, it was win-win because I feel like it gave the company more insight into what was happening. But
Mhm.
two, I was now at the center of writing that, and I could easily tactfully share what I had been doing to push each of these forward. And the amount of, well, the number of people who then came to me to ask me for questions about what was going on was staggering. And so I feel like the influence and status that I had just like accelerated so quickly, and suddenly I was kind of in an important place where I was the one who knew what was going on, but again, could also be advocating for myself for what I was doing.
Yes, and I just want to underscore the fact about the memorability of that executive using stories. We are over 20 times more likely to remember something when it's combined with a story rather than facts alone. And so again, just wrapping it in a little anecdote or example goes such a long way. And to your point about writing those updates, that's a excellent strategy, especially if you tend to be someone who's more introverted, maybe you don't think on your feet as well. And writing gives you a bit more control over the narrative to prepare and really craft what you want to say. But you also had a different form of power there. You had informational power. So I think we think of title, we think of status and power, we think title and rank. And that's not always true. You know, someone like yourself, when you have that informational power and visibility, that made you a super connector, a conduit that people were coming to. It's a very, very valuable place to be.
Okay, maybe last question. If you want to get in your boss's head and really understand what their motives, their goals are, how do you do that?
Yes. Yeah. This is all about actually the first chapter in the book starts here, the alignment conversation, because this is the most fundamental. You need to make sure that you're, for your own sake, you're working on the right things. You're working on what really matters to the person who really holds the keys to your future, your success at the company. And this is all about asking really great questions. So trying to understand, you know, I think a lot of people boss bash. There's a lot of, you know, bosses are difficult and toxic. And yes, those people 100% exist. But many times, I think a lot of friction comes in with our manager because we don't understand the pressures and the demands they are under. And so if you can just periodically, this can be in your weekly one-on-ones, you could just pepper these into conversations, but questions to understand, you know, what metrics is your boss's boss measuring them on, and how are those calculated? So you can map to what is going to be most important to your boss's performance. What keeps you up at night when you're thinking about our team, our projects? How do my responsibilities contribute to the overall success of the team? What would good performance look like? What would great performance look like? If I was to create a ton of value over the next 3 or 6 months, what would you like to see me accomplish? What do you wish you had more time to work on? Or what's something I could do to make your job easier right now? All of those questions give you a lot of insight into what's going on in your boss's head beyond just the explicit things that they've said to you so far.
So one of my friends, Liz Wiseman, she was an
Mhm.
executive at Oracle, author of the book Multipliers, and I remember one of the stories she shared. Speaking to stories, not just data, right? So she shares this
Mhm.
story that I still remember years later, and she had this great idea for something she wanted to work on at Oracle, and so she approaches her boss, and she's like, "I really want to do it. I know it would help." Like she was so excited about it. And the boss is like, "Well, great, and that would be great, but what I really need is this other thing." And
Mhm.
so now Liz has this, like, well, crap, I really wanted to do X and now he's asking me to do Y. But she's like, okay, great, I'll do Y. And then doing Y ended up just totally launching her career at Oracle and giving her so many opportunities. And then she was eventually able to do X down the road, right? And the lesson, I mean, there's so many from that, but one, of course, is just make yourself valuable to what your managers need, and ultimately that will give you a lot more opportunities than if you're just trying to work on what you most value, especially if it's not in alignment with what your manager values.
That's right.
Okay, so many great tips, Melody. I can't wait to read the book. I just want to give you the last word as we're wrapping up here. Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I come back to that idea of teaching people how to treat you. You have more power than you think. If you feel helpless, if you feel like work and your relationships are out of control right now, um, think about what is one way you're currently teaching people how to treat you. Maybe it's that you are responding to emails within, a couple of minutes of receiving them, and you're starting to teach people that you'll always be responsive. So just take a look at those dynamics, experiment with shifting some things, and I think you'll see that the way people start responding to you, they may not always like it at first, I will say that, but over time, if you are consistent with that, the way they respond to you, perceive you will change.
Such a great, insightful lesson. It's no wonder so many executives seek you out, Melody. Thanks so much for joining the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.